بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Continuing from the topic we started a couple of weeks ago with regards to food and at'imah in Islam, we concluded last week's lesson by looking at the Islamic ruling with regards to seafood. And I mentioned that according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimullah, out of all the creatures in the sea, the only creature one is allowed to consume is a fish. Whereas the other schools of thought, they say that you can consume whatever you want from the sea. And keeping this rule in mind, we can derive that according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, consuming lobsters and crabs would not be permissible. However, according to the other Imams, Imam Malik, Shafi, Ahmad, they say that it would be permissible to consume lobsters and crabs. So this was the final ruling I mentioned in last week's lesson. Now in this week's lesson, we're going to continue by looking at some other animals which a person is not allowed to consume and eat. And then afterwards, I'll move on to some rulings with regards to slaughtering and zabiha. And then if we have time at the end, I'll mention some adabs and some etiquettes regarding the next section which we're going to start. And that is with regards to drinking. So we looked at adabs and etiquettes and things which we can eat and consume when it comes to eating, but the next section will be with regards to drinking. What are the adabs, what are the etiquettes, the sunnah to be more precise, when it comes to drinking, the sunnah which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us to observe. Now the first thing which I'm going to mention in today's lesson is that it is also mentioned in a hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that it is impermissible and unlawful to consume the nabim min as-soy or the mikhlab min at-toy, which means that any wild animals which hunt with their teeth, any vicious animals which hunt with their teeth such as tigers, lions, cats, mongoose, you name it, wolf, hyenas, and also all those wild birds, the mikhlab who hunt with their claws such as falcon, hawk, these kind of animals, crows in particular, the black one, the dark one, which tends to eat carcasses and carrion. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that to consume these type of animals is unlawful and haram for a Muslim. And not only that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has also mentioned that those animals which we consider to be pests, hasharatul ard, such as your cats, such as your rats, your mice, these kind of creatures, spiders, hasharatul ard, they are also unlawful and haram to consume as well. So any animals which attack others, whether they are human beings or which hunt other animals, like your tigers, like your hawk, like your mongooses, like your rats, like your dogs, your cats and so on, the bears, monkeys, even gorillas, then to consume them will be haram. And also those animals or creatures which are known as domestic pests, like the rats, the mice, cats and so on, they are also unlawful and haram to consume as well. Now I mentioned this particular point in last week's lesson, that the reason why these animals in particular are unlawful to consume is because these animals are vicious. Fitratan, khilqatan, they are vicious, they attack animals. And I mentioned spiritually what will happen is that if somebody starts eating and consuming these animals, then he won't know it, but indirectly, spiritually, he will develop this viciousness inside him. The raham and the mercy would go away from that particular person. That's why we hear cases of men killing their own children, or men just killing children, just in general, or men killing or abusing children. So what could be one of the reasons why, not saying that this is the main reason or the only reason, but one of the sabab, one of the causes could be because of what they are eating. Because they are eating all these haram animals, because they go into these Chinatown restaurants where you get dogs and cats and snakes, you eat that. So then what happens is that you start develop this viciousness in your heart, in your spirituality, and then that then shows in your behavior, in your a'mals, in your qirdad, in your actions. And that's why we see all these cases of little boys, little girls getting abused. We see cases of toddlers getting kidnapped and then getting killed, brutally killed. So this could happen. One of the reasons is because of the food they are consuming. So that is one reason why it is unlawful and haram. And another reason why these animals are unlawful and haram is because the Sharia has described these animals to be khabith. وَيُحَرِّمُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْخَبَائِثِ, which is in the Holy Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described these animals to be khabith, something like evil, something dirty, something filthy. And any right thinking, sane-minded person should not be consuming that. And this leads to a particular opinion of one of our akabireens, one of our pious predecessors, Maulana Anwar Shah Kashmiri rahimahullah, that he has mentioned that to detect or to determine whether animal is khabith or not can be seen when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala metamorphosized nations, did mask of nations. In which animals did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did mask of these people to? So in the Quran we find examples of the Banu Israel. They were turned into monkeys and swines. In a hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that some of the Banu Israel were turned into rats and other kind of animals as well, like scorpions, snakes and these kind of things. So people being turned into monkeys, people being turned into swines or rats or snakes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changing these people into swines, monkeys, snakes, these kind of animals and pests is a sign that these animals fitratan and khilqatan are khabith as well. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala humiliated that nation, punished that nation by turning these people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them eyes, which is a blessing, nose blessing, ears blessing, tongue blessing, speaking, takallum, which is a blessing. But now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changed them into monkeys. Allah changed them into swines. Allah changed them into dogs and rats and snakes and you name it. So that is a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because Allah decided to change these people into these animals, that in itself is telling us that these animals are khabith, are literally khabith as well. They are literally also filthy and evil. Hence the punishment, when it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it came in the form of these animals. And to tell the truth, I think this is once Mona Tariq Jamil Sahib mentioned in his bayan and in his lectures, that if it wasn't for the dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for this ummah, we would have probably been turned into monkeys already. We would have been swines already. If it wasn't for the dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the request Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made to Allah, that Allah do not send mass punishment to this ummah. It's in the Quran as well. وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُؤَذِّبَهُمْ وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted the dua and He said that as long as you are alive, or you are the ummah, you are the messenger and the Rasul of this ummah, then there won't be any mass punishment for this ummah. Because if it wasn't for this dua, seriously, we would have, because of our qurtut, because of our qirdad, look at the bad and evil things which we do. It's a great blessing from Allah that He's concealed all our sins. Because if He wanted to, He could have exposed all of us and He would have probably turned us into monkeys and swine, and we would have been like climbing up trees and moving and barking around. That's what we have been doing. That would have been our punishment. One of our kabireens, Maulana Ahmad Ali Lahori rahimullah, has it's mentioned in one of his biographies that alhamdulillah he had kashf meaning that he was able to see what was inside people. So it's mentioned in one of his biographies that when he looked at a person, he could determine spiritually what that person was. So he could see in that person that, oh, he's an animal, he's a dog, or he's a monkey, or he's a swine, or he's a pig, and he could actually see that. And obviously those who are Allah wale, the awliyaullah, they could actually visualize and they could see people. Then same with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well, that there are many stories of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that when he would be in salah, there's a very famous hadith of Sahih Bukhari that when he was in the kusuf prayer, kusuf is a prayer which you pray when there's a solar eclipse. So it's mentioned in the hadith that the veils opened up and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was seeing Jannah in front of him. He was seeing Jahannam in front of him. So those whose heart are clean and pure, those who are very, very pious, what happens is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remove the veil, and that's what we call kashf, removes everything, and then you can see through people. You can see through, like say for example, what's inside them, whether their ruh or their soul has been turned into monkeys or swine, they are able to detect that. So spiritually, there may be many of us who are really, really bad. Our ruh and our soul may be akin to that of an animal, but apparently Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has protected us. But that's the only protection, that's the only line of protection. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted, He could have taken our apparent features away, and what is really inside us, our immoral feelings, our bad feelings, our proneness to commit sins, that would have come to that would have come out, and then people would have seen us. So this is a great blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has concealed our sins, otherwise we would have been really, really, because of all the things which we do. And we're not just talking about non-Muslims here, we're just talking about our Muslims ourselves. All the deception which goes on, the people outside, they got big, big beards, and you try to do dealing with them when it comes to business, but very few of them are sincere. Very few of them will keep their word. They'll promise you that, oh, this is the problem, but very few of them will keep the word. So this is something which we need to put some mehnat on, and the mehnat actually goes in our lack of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to build that link with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We need to be more engaging in our salah, not just like coming for namaz just for the sake of it, or just to make it ritualistic, to pray salah properly. When we are praying, making sure that we are concentrating and we are doing our ibadats properly, as mentioned in the hadith, that the way we should worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an ta'budallah ka'annaka tara, which means that imagine that you are seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is the way of worshipping Allah, to have the full devotion and the full concentration. And inshallah, when we manage to do that, then hopefully all these bad things which we are involved in, it will slowly go away. Now, so going back to the text here, so any kind of vicious animals or animals which attack, whether they are birds or whether they are wild animals, then to consume them will be unlawful and would be haram. The author then goes on to say that according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, it is also considered makruh and disliked to consume horses, and it is considered haram and impermissible to consume donkeys. So there are two types of donkeys. One is what we call wild donkeys, which in English is given the name of zebras. So to consume zebras, then that is permissible, that is allowed. However, domestic donkeys, himar or hamir or bagal or bigal, these domestic donkeys, mules, ass, whatever you call them, they are unlawful and haram to consume. And with regards to horses, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is of the opinion that it is also makruh, not haram, but it is makruh to consume horses. But besides them, other kind of domestic animals who eat grass or who suffices on grains and rice and leaves and these kind of things, then it is permissible to consume them. So say for example, like your cows, your buffaloes, your camels, your goats, your sheep, then to consume them, chickens, to consume them, then they are permissible, they are allowed, because they just eat the lawful things. They're not carnivores, they don't eat meat, but they just suffice on the the vegetable kind of things. So to consume them, that would be permissible, that would be allowed. But besides them, something like horses will also like consume grass and hay and these kind of things, but you're not allowed to consume them. And with regards to donkeys, you're also not allowed to consume them as well. And the reason why is because regarding horses and donkeys, there are hadiths which indicate towards its impermissibility. Hence, we are not allowed to eat them. But obviously other domestic animals like your cows, camels, goats, sheep, it will be lawful and halal to consume. But there is one exception when it comes to these domestic animals such as cows and camels. And that exception is that if the cows and camels or even the goats and sheep are such that they eat impurity, يَأْكُلُ النَّجَسَ, that they eat najasat, then you're not allowed to consume them. Because you get some who, what happens, in particular with chickens, it happens a lot, that they don't eat their grains or whatever they eat. But what happens is that in particular in the villages, they start eating the impurities either of themselves, so their feces, they eat that, or they eat the dung or the feces of other animals. So then to consume that animal would also be unlawful and haram as well. So it's all based on the food. As I was explaining right at the beginning, because when we eat something halal, there's the spiritual effect of it. Similarly, if these chickens and these goats and sheep, if they are consuming haram as well, then it also has an effect as well. So with these animals, you have to make sure that they're not eating something impure, something najas, they're not consuming dungs or feces of other animals, because then that will then have an effect on the meat. And then when you do slaughter these animals like these chickens, the smell from these animals tends to be very, very bad, very, very foul. So therefore you'll have an effect on a particular individual. So therefore the Sharia, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that their meat is also unlawful and haram to consume as well. Another ruling here, this is more got to do with the skin of the animal, not with regards to the meat. That besides two creatures or two creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every other animal's skin, if it's either been Islamically slaughtered, or number two, you have tanned the skin, and tanning means like you get the skin and then you leave it out to dry, or you put some chemicals inside so it takes away the impurity and the najas, then besides two creations of Allah, i.e. pigs and human beings, all other creation of Allah, all other animals of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their skin would be lawful and permissible to use. Now why can't we use pig skin? So the answer is simple, I mentioned before, is because every aspect of a khinzir and a swine is najas. So every little thing, its saliva, its tail, its feet, its hooves, whatever, every single aspect of a khinzir, of a swine is najas, is impure. So when a pig dies and then you take off its skin, you're not allowed to use its skin at all. And I mentioned this last week, that what would they do in olden days, that they would use the boar bristles to make bristles in brushes, and then people would use it to paint their masjids and paint their homes and so on. So that wouldn't be allowed, to the extent the scholars have mentioned that if you used boar bristles to paint a masjid, the walls of the masjid will become najas and impure. If you used the boar bristles to brush your carpet and so on, and if the bristles were wet, then, because obviously if it's dry, there's no traces of impurity on the carpet, but just say if the boar bristles were wet and then you kind of brush the carpet, then the carpet will also become najas and impure as well. So every aspect or a juz of a swine that is najas, you're not allowed to use it. Human beings, you can't use their skin. That is more because of respect, not because they are impure, but out of karamat and respect of a human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Sharia said that you can't use their skin. So when they pass away, you're not allowed to use their skin, even to the extent to use their organs is not allowed, is not permissible. Somebody just asked recently about organ transplant. So that is generally speaking the ruling, that organ transplant like taking somebody's liver or kidney after he's passed away and then putting it into somebody else's, then that strictly speaking is not allowed, is not permissible. Obviously, contemporary scholars have said that where there is, say, a life and death matter, a life and death issue, then to take out the kidney and then to use it, then it may be permissible, it may be allowed. But it should not be like a general fatwa or general ruling. Every situation, every case should be dealt individually. So generally speaking, to use human beings, their organs, their skin, that is not allowed. But besides that, any other animals, whether it's your cows, whether it's your snakes even, whether it's a dog, if it's been killed, and then just say somebody's taken the skin, and then afterwards they chemically treated it, and they've taken away, they absorbed the impurity, and they just got the dry skin of the dog, or the dry skin of that cow. Or just say, for example, that animal has been Islamically slaughtered. Now, dog you can't eat or consume it, but just somebody got hold of a dog, and he then did Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, he slaughtered that dog. Now obviously you're not allowed to consume that dog, but that skin of the animal, it would become lawful and permissible to now use. Even though you haven't tanned it, but if you did an Islamic zabah over it, that animal, its skin would be lawful and permissible to use. Now keeping these rules in mind, we can derive that sometimes people, they have boots made out of snake skin, or like something like belts made out of snake skin, then to use that would be permissible. Because obviously, as I've just been explaining, that when the snake, when he gets killed or when he gets captured or when he dies, they then take the skin of the snake and then they kind of like dry it. They put chemicals inside. These big companies, they put chemicals inside. They dry the skin of the snake. Then they make into belts, or they make into wallets, or they make into some other kind of caps and so on. Then to use that, then that would be permissible. That would be lawful. But whatever pig skin is used, even though they've put chemicals inside the skin, even though they washed it with bleach or whatever, it will still remain najas, it will still remain napak. And I was explaining to a brother last week that sometimes you just need to be careful that some of these shoes, which we sometimes wear, they may have the leather may be made out of pig skin or suede leather in particular, different types of leathers. So one is most of the leathers, like leather jackets we wear, they normally come from cattle. So they use the cattle, the hides from there, the dry, and they make it into leather. But suede leather in particular, some companies, some manufacturers, they use pig skin because pig is much cheaper. So they use pig skin to make it into suede leather. So in that situation, you have to be very careful that if it is pig skin, or some shoes in particular from Clarks, some of these Clarks brand shoes, they tend to have, the sole is tend to be made out of pig. So you just have to be very careful that some of these companies, they do use pig. Even some of these cars as well, in the steering, they use pig skin as well. So these kind of things, you just have to be careful. You need to obviously do a bit of tahqiq and find out that, phone customer service or wallah alam, phone someone and just find out that whether they're making it out of pig skin or not. Because if they are, then obviously if your hands, say for example, are wet and then you're driving, then the najas from that steering wheel will then come into your hands. There'll be impurity in your hand. You think, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. Then go and start namaz. Your namaz will not be done. And many examples, similarly, if you are just quickly did wuzu, you washed your feet, and then you just sometimes when you rush at home and you're going to miss your jamaat, you quickly do your wuzu, and then you don't really put your socks on, so you just quickly put your wet feet into the shoes, and then you come to the masjid. So again, if the shoes were made out of pig skin, then the najas there will come onto your feet. You then take it off and you come and read namaz, and the namaz not accepted. Not only that, you're going to be making the carpet napak and najas as well. So you just have to be careful that these clothing which we sometimes wear, in particular jeans and these kind of things, you just have to be careful that whether they are actually made from pig skin or not. Especially nowadays where we've got internet and other kind of customer services, they have a phone number there where you could actually call them and find out. Obviously, fair enough, if it was something where if we were in the middle of, say, a jungle or in the middle of a desert where, we're not sure or we don't have any means of communications, then fair enough, you don't have to do that much tahqiq or investigation. But when we have internet at home, when we have all the the means of communication, when there's a number there of that particular company on the internet, then what we should do is that we should try to at least try our best to make some investigation and tahqiq to find out that what materials they are using to make that particular thing, so that obviously our namaz and everything else would be considered valid, because that's what taqwa is. Taqwa, which we always talk about, piety. Taqwa and piety is that you stay away from doubtful things. You can't achieve taqwa and piety by doing dodgy things or by taking doubtful things. You will never ever achieve piety and taqwa. When it comes to food in particular, if it's slightly doubtful that the chicken or the meat they're using is not lawful, then taqwa is that you stay away from it. You stay away even from the mashkook and the doubtful things. So that's what taqwa and piety is. So exactly here as well, when we know that these things, there could be a chance that is made from pig skin. So taqwa and piety is that we should also refrain from that as well. Now just one or two more rulings about dhabiha and about slaughtering. Now another ruling I mentioned in brief last week when I was looking at the conditions of slaughtering is Bismillah. That one of the conditions for the animal to be considered lawful and halal to consume is that the slaughterer, the zabih, has to say Bismillah, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and then slaughter the animal. And if this Bismillah is missed out, then that animal is not lawful and halal to consume. And this Bismillah has to be done for every single animal. For every single dhabiha, for every single animal, you have to say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. And it also has to be said verbally as well. So you can't have in some chicken factories where they just put the speaker of Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. So there's like thousands and thousands chickens being slaughtered, and then on the tannoy it's being saying Bismillah, Bismillah, or something like that. So that won't be allowed. So the zabi, the slaughterer, has to say Bismillah, and also it has to be done for every single chicken. If it is missed out, as I was explaining, then that animal would be unlawful and haram to consume. And this is, when we look at it, is more or less the opinions of Imam Malik and Imam Ahmad. Imam Shafi rahimullah, he's of the opinion that to say Bismillah and slaughter the animal, that is only sunnat. Imam Shafi rahimullah says that it's sunnat. But then when we look in the Shafi books, it does say that it is sunnah when if it is done kabi kabar, i.e. just say, for example, once in a blue moon. If somebody continuously misses out Bismillah when slaughtering the animal, then that animal would be also unlawful and haram to consume. So I'll just explain that ruling of Imam Shafi. The reason why I'm explaining is of sometimes a problem which some Muslims face, which I'll explain, and they use this opinion of Imam Shafi. So Imam Shafi, he does say that it's only sunnah to say Bismillah when it comes to slaughtering the animal. However, he does also go on to say that if somebody constantly and continuously or regularly misses out Bismillah and then slaughters the animal, then that animal would be unlawful and haram to consume. Now the problem or the issues which many of our brothers face, in particular when we are working in particular with Arabs, or when we meet Arabs, or when we go to Saudi or Umrah or Hajj, is that we're just doubting this particular meat, whether it's lawful, whether it's halal. And the question, or when we say, oh, we don't want to eat it because we're not sure whether this meat is lawful or halal. So many of our Arab brothers will say, oh, just say Bismillah and eat it. Bismillah parke kalo. It doesn't matter. Just say Bismillah and then eat it. That would be okay. And as evidence, they'll sometimes use Imam Shafi's opinion. They'll say, oh, well, Imam Shafi said it's sunnah. And sometimes they will use this hadith, which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, where some meat once came to Hazrat Aisha anha, and the hadith says that these people were new Muslims. They just like converted to Islam. So they would sometimes give meat to Hazrat Aisha, to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And once Hazrat Aisha then has said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that these people, they just converted to Islam, they're giving us some meat, and I get this doubt that whether their meat is lawful or halal. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, say Bismillah and eat it. And sometimes what happens is that they use this hadith to like even determine or even say that, or you could buy meat from haram places, but just say Bismillah and eat it, and that would be lawful and halal. Now the two hadiths or two scenarios are different. What Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Hazrat Aisha Danha was because Hazrat Aisha Danha was just having unfounded doubts, because the people who had just slaughtered these animals, they were Muslims. Alright, fair enough, they were not new Muslims, but at the end of the day they were Muslims. So Hazrat Aisha Danha had this kind of shock that, oh, they're not probably slaughtering it properly, they're not doing it properly. So she had this kind of unfounded doubt and unfounded shock. So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Hazrat Aisha that, okay, there's no need for you to get into too much shock and too much doubt, because then it's going to play in your mind all the time. Just say Bismillah and eat it. And now what's happening is that a lot of people, where they know the meat is haram, they know that, you go into Burger King or McDonald's and you're ordering a beef burger, you know it's haram. But then they'll say, no, just say Bismillah and eat it. Many Arabs, they do that. Just say Bismillah and eat it. They know they'll take meat from haram places. They know it's haram. They'll take it from the local butchers, whatever, and they'll just take it home. They'll make whatever they made, and they'll just say Bismillah and they'll eat it. And they'll use this particular hadith here. As you can see, the two hadiths, or 2 points are different, because the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari of Aisha Danha, the hadith quite clearly says that they were new Muslims. They were Muslims, fair enough, they were new, they just converted recently, but at the end of the day they were Muslims. So Aisha just had this kind of unfounded doubt and shock. Whereas when it came to the hadith, when it came to their situation, they are buying it from non-Muslim outlets. They're going into Burger Kings, they're going to McDonald's, where we know for sure that the meat they're providing is haram and lawful. They know that for sure 100%. Then to say, oh, just read Bismillah and eat it, and that would make it lawful and halal, then that is not the case. That would not be allowed. That would not be impermissible. But what we can gather from this hadith, and this is like advice to all the brothers, is that where there's no doubt, or where there's, say for example, somebody's inviting you for food, and just say for example he's living in a Muslim area, like say in Alam Rock, Spark Hill, Comchi Road, around these places where many halal stores around, many HMC, meat shops around. Now for you to have waswasas and shock and doubt, then that is wrong. When a Muslim, say for example from these Asian areas, if he's inviting you and he's giving you some chicken or meat, whatever, and he's living in a Muslim populated area, there's so many halal shops around, then for you to do doubt and shock, then that is wrong. And that's when this hadith applies, that in that situation what you should say is Bismillah and eat it. Say for example, you've got relatives somewhere somewhere down south in Southampton or Brighton, where there's hardly any Muslims there, and he's inviting you, and then he's giving you some chicken curry or meat curry. Then there's a bit more shock here, because they're living in a non-Muslim populated area. There's probably no halal stores around. The nearest store probably is like a Asda or a Tesco, and you probably think that they probably got the meat from Tesco and Asda and they're giving it to me. So in that situation, then you've got a right to do a bit of shock. Then you can ask that particular person, okay brother, where did you get the meat from? And if he's got it from a non-Muslim outlet, or from an outlet where they don't do the Islamic zabah and slaughtering, then obviously you should refrain from eating it. But obviously when a person is inviting you from within our area, then, because sometimes what happens is that people, they just get unfounded doubts, right? It's good to do ihtiyat and taqwa, but it doesn't mean that you then start doing shock and doubt on silly issues or petty issues where that it's like Muslims, they're gonna feed you, or they're gonna try their best to feed you halal and lawful. And in particular, if the person is from a local area where there's so many halal outlets, so many HMC stores around, then that probably most likely he got it from one of these places. So therefore, to then have a doubt or shock, or to then refuse to eat at that particular brother's house or that particular person's house, would be against muruwat, against adab and etiquette. In that situation, that's when the hadith of Aisha Danha applies, that just say Bismillah and eat it, and because of the barakah of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or barakah of Quran, barakah of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what you eat will be lawful, would be halal, and inshallah any kind of doubt which was there will go away by just saying or reciting Bismillah. Inshallah, we'll leave it there for this week. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act on what's been said. Wa akhiru da'wana.